At 14, my dad slapped me twice and tossed me out into a snowstorm, all because my sister's lies. I almost died, but my mom made sure justice was served. The door slammed shut, creating a sound that echoed not just through the blizzard-whipped night, but deep throughout my bones. A last and decisive crack. I stood freezing, shoeless and coatless, amid the whirling snow. My cheek was burning with the ghost of my father's handprint, and through the glass window I saw my sister Hannah. Her lips curled into a slow, contented smile as she turned away. That winter in Wisconsin, December, meant the darkness came early, consuming the daytime by 5:30. Our kitchen, which is normally pleasant and lively, felt quiet that evening as I leaned over my equations. The calculations blurred as the snow piled heavier outside. The weather service had been issuing warnings all day, a frenetic chorus against the peaceful silence of the approaching storm. But Hannah, 17, a master of obtaining what she wants, had decided she needed to go to the mall with her pals. Our father, for once, had stood fast. The roads were already a dangerous canvas of ice and white, with visibility dwindling with each breath, and the storm was just getting worse. Hannah's expression shifted in a quick series of emotions, from astonishment at being told no to a flash of wrath, and then the cold, disturbing flicker of calculating. She'd stomped upstairs, the slamming of her bedroom door ringing through the quiet home and rattling the cheap frames in the corridor. I, for one, was simply delighted to be invisible for a change, a phantom presence amidst the developing family drama. But here's the thing. You never completely understand the dark currents that run beneath the surface until something breaks the illusion of peace. What occurred next continues to unfold in my memory, a never-ending cycle of terror that I can't seem to stop seeing. Hannah arrived 25 minutes later at the bottom of the stairs, her makeup smudged and her shirt ripped at the neck exactly so. The sobbing racked her. But these were not the furious, resentful tears from before. They gave a deliberate and dramatic display, interrupted by gasping hyperventilation. Dad dropped his newspaper, a startling rustling breaking the quiet, his face drained of color. The tale she told was complex, a tapestry of deception wrought with vivid, devastating details. She accused me of following her upstairs, attacking her for being the favorite, pushing her against the wall, ripping her clothing, and venomously declaring, "I wish she'd never been born." Each charge, given between believable, painful cries, was more absurd than the previous. She said I had been plagued by envy for years, had threatened her previously, and that she had been too scared to speak. It was a textbook example of pathological manipulation. Such persons frequently fabricate sophisticated falsehoods, not simply spontaneously, but with premeditation, playing on emotional weaknesses within the family structure to reach a desired objective, often with little regard for the consequences. They understand how to use apparent victimhood to shift responsibility and shape narratives. My father stood slowly, his look changing to one I'd never seen aimed at me. Cold, hard rage. My voice was faint with terror as I pleaded with him. I attempted to explain, pointing to my mathematics homework scattered across the table, the fresh pencil lines, and the half-solved problems as indisputable proof that I had been right there in plain sight the entire time. He did not listen. Maybe he was already too angry, too engrossed in Hannah's genuine pain to hear logic. Or maybe her act was just that compelling. She had always been theatrical, capable of eliciting tears on command, but I never believed she'd use those abilities against me. He grabbed my arm, jerking me off the chair so aggressively that my water glass shattered on the tile floor. Its shattering sound and dreadful punctuation accompanied Hannah's resumed dramatic cries. He continued to make strong and aggressive allegations. How dare I harm my sister? What type of person was I becoming? He had raised me better than this and given me everything. This is how I repaid him. His grasp on my arm tightened, prompting a cry of pain from me, which only served to feed his fury. He assumed I was copying Hannah's drama and putting on a show. My mother, bless her sensible heart, was 4 states away, caring for her sister following surgery, which Hannah had definitely factored into her scheduling. Mom would have questioned, scrutinized, and researched. Dad simply responded. The first slap landed with a violent power that took my breath away, startling me into a quiet deeper than any cry. My face burned with a searing, furious heat, and I tasted the metallic tang of blood from where my teeth had sliced the inside of my mouth. He had never been a violent man, and had never received a spanking as a youngster. But something in Hannah's narrative triggered a wrath in him that I had never known existed. The second blow sent me backward, sending my hips smashing hard onto the kitchen counter. Hannah's tears had ended. Through the spinning cloud of pain in my eyes, I noticed her staring from the doorway, her countenance seemingly interested and devoid of fear or astonishment. There was just satisfaction. The expression of someone whose well-planned strategy was playing out exactly as expected. That expression, that icy, smug sparkle in her eyes, told me everything about how premeditated this treachery was. This instant and exaggerated reaction from my father, prompted by Hannah's story, exemplifies confirmation bias combined with a deep-seated emotional trigger. He had an inherent confidence in Hannah's victimization, and her performance reinforced that perception, overriding any critical evaluation of the circumstance or questioning of facts. Individuals in such a heightened emotional state are readily blinded to contradicting evidence, particularly if it challenges their immediate emotional response or firmly held preconceptions about their children. Dad hauled me to the front door, despite my urgent screams, my hoarse assurances that I had done nothing wrong. The storm outside had worsened. The wind shrieked around the corners of the house, and snow piled against the porch railing. He pushed me out into the bitter cold, barefoot and gloveless, wearing just the small jacket I'd worn to school. The door banged behind me, and I heard a horrible thud as the deadbolts fell into place. The cold hit me like a physical blow, removing breath from my lungs. The wind tore at my meager garments, and the snow quickly soaked through my footwear. I knocked on the door, yelling till my throat was sore, but no one responded. Hannah was standing at the entrance, arms folded, watching me freeze. She grinned and turned away. I had no option but to move. Standing motionless meant succumbing to the cold, and even at 14, I saw the frightening seriousness of my position. My dearest friend Sophie lived 5 streets away. On a regular day it was a quick trek, but in this snowstorm, it felt like an impossible polar adventure. The snow had already blurred the distinctions between yard and street, turning the area into a hazardous, homogeneous white expanse. The visibility was barely 10 feet, the streetlights are worthless halos in the swirling pandemonium. Walking was difficult. The snowdrifts seized my feet and I fell twice. My hands sank into drifts that reached nearly to my waist. My fingers were already numb, and my face was burning from frostbite. The wind became an unseen force, pushing, dragging, bewildering, and unrelenting. My feet were phantom limbs and my lungs hurt from breathing the cold air. Every house I passed was a beacon of warmth and protection, shining through the swirling snow. I watched families moving around their kitchens, children watching TV in nice living rooms, and regular Saturday night activities taking place as I was battling for my life outdoors. Shame, a frigid companion, prevented me from knocking and pleading for rescue. How can I explain this? What phrases would make sense if your father threw you out? Sophie's house loomed through the snow like a mirage, bringing an unexpected sense of comfort. My frozen intellect had acted on sheer, desperate impulse. The porch light was lit. A gorgeous golden beacon. I staggered up their driveway, tripped twice while ascending the porch stairs, and crashed against the front door. My fists were too numb to bang, so I kicked the wood. I was certain that the storm's fury would drown out the weak thumps. Then the door opened, and Sophie's mother, Mrs. Collins, gasped. Mrs. Collins, a woman I'd known since 2nd grade, drew me in without saying anything, her warm hands cradling my icy face while she called for her husband. They covered me in blankets, sat me by their roaring fireplace, and served me hot cocoa, which I couldn't even grasp since my fingers wouldn't cooperate. Sophie emerged in her pajamas, her eyes wide and shocked. The Collins family, bless them, did not press for explanations straight away. Mrs. Collins carefully checked my face, her visage tightening into a hard knot when she noticed the bruises that had already appeared on my cheek and jaw. Mr. Collins, a quiet guy, went upstairs and returned carrying dry clothing, thick socks, and a big sweater. They simply let me sit there and defrost, the shaking lasting for what felt like hours as my body struggled to regain its warmth. However, that was merely the beginning of the horror. Eventually, the words began to flow, first in pieces, then in a raw, uncontrollable torrent as the full narrative poured out. Hannah's falsehoods, Dad's terrifying reaction, and the violent deportation into the snow. Mrs. Collins's visage alternated between shock, fear, and a furious protective rage. Mr. Collins became extremely silent, the type of silence that felt heavier and more menacing than any screaming. They tried to contact my residence. No response. They attempted 4 more times over the following hour and got the same chilly outcome. Dad was either purposefully ignoring the phone, or had just turned off the ringer, a practice he occasionally indulged in when he needed silence. Mrs. Collins left a message on the answering machine. Her voice was carefully controlled as she explained how secure I was among them. She didn't mention the horrible state I'd come in, but her tone was unmistakably chilly. Sophie and I had been together since 2nd grade, and her parents knew my family well. Mrs. Collins had always liked and respected my mother's work as a nurse. She'd been cordial, if rather chilly, to my father, and now, with the chilling clarity of hindsight, I see why. She'd most certainly noticed something, a small warning sign of the aggression he'd kept hidden until that night. Sleep was impossible. I rested in Sophie's guest room, secure and cozy. Nonetheless, my mind kept replaying the evening's occurrences. Hannah's calculating face bothered me the most. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst of rage. It was carefully planned, arranged, and precisely timed for Mom's absence. But why? What had I done to deserve such venom from my own sister? The answer came with the morning light, which shone through the curtains like a sharp revelation. Hannah had wanted to visit the mall. Dad said no. She needed to change his attention to create a situation so severe that her requests would be forgotten. I had been handy collateral, a sacrifice she was ready to make to divert his attention, a pawn in her devious game. The knowledge caused my stomach to churn with a sharp metallic flavor. My mother arrived at the Collins house at 8 a.m. on Sunday. The blizzard had finally passed, leaving 3 feet of new snow and roads that were barely half cleaned. Mom must have driven through treacherous circumstances to come home early, putting her sister's recuperation on hold in the face of this unexpected, desperate need. Mrs. Collins had finally contacted her late the night before and carefully explained the issue. Mom's expression when she saw me was dreadful to see, a mask of sadness and rising wrath. Mrs. Collins had painstakingly photographed my injuries with her digital camera, preserving the evidence before it faded. The photos revealed a definite handprint on my cheek, another bruise on my jaw, and finger-shaped markings on my upper arm from Dad grabbing me. My mother examined each shot, her visage darkening with every click. She grabbed me tightly, as if I was about to break. Her hands trembled as she caressed my face and studied the bruises, absorbing the horrible deed perpetrated against her daughter. I had never seen my mother weep before. She was always realistic, stoic, and dealt with situations with the same calm efficiency that she did in the hospital. But tears streamed down her cheeks as she listened to my narrative of the previous night, and something basic, irreversible, moved behind her eyes. This was a watershed event in the family dynamic, a tipping point at which the old equilibrium, however dysfunctional, could no longer be maintained. The mother, who had before served as a facilitator through her absence or even passive acceptance, now becomes the principal driver of change, propelled by a keen understanding of the terrible betrayal and danger. Her reaction shows the psychological power needed to face abuse and set firm limits. The journey home was quiet. Mom's hands held the driving wheel so firmly that her knuckles became white, yet her expression remained oddly serene. It was the expression she used when dealing with tough patients. A mask of controlled wrath. I observed her profile and felt something unexpected. Hopefully, maybe, things would not be okay. They would never be done the same way again, but they would certainly be different. When we stepped in, Dad was sitting at the kitchen table, reading the Sunday paper just like any other morning. He looked up, his expression transforming from astonishment to remorse when his gaze rested on me. The bruises, which were bright purple and yellow, told their own compelling narrative. He opened his lips to speak, but Mom raised her hand as a quiet, uncompromising demand. When she talked, her voice was calm yet powerful, like a tidal wave. "Don't talk. Just listen." Hannah came in the doorway, still dressed in her pajamas with her hair tangled from sleep. She froze, calculations flashing over her face as she attempted to assess the situation. Mom turned to look at her, and whatever my sister saw in that expression caused her to take an unintentional step backward. Mom presented the facts calmly and dispassionately. The timing was unequivocal, confirming I had been at the kitchen table. When Hannah claimed I had attacked her, I had the testimony of the Collins family, who had sheltered me, irrefutable photographs documenting the violence Dad had inflicted, and the medical evaluation Mrs. Collins had insisted on that morning, which confirmed minor frostbite on my fingers and toes, exposure-related injuries that could have been fatal. Blocks in that storm, she explained, had been a potentially deadly distance. Dad tried to interject to explain that he had been protecting Hannah. He had believed his daughter. He had responded in the moment. Even he recognized that his justifications were hollow. I could tell. His face turned bleak as Mom calmly detailed the snowy conditions, extremely low temperatures, and the very real probability that I might not have lived. Then Mom turned to Hannah. "Tell the truth now." My sister's face went through the usual rapid-fire sequence. Defiance, followed by calculating, and then pure, unadulterated dread. She was adept at lying, but not good enough to fool our mother, especially when Mom was staring at her with that cold, clinical expression. The stillness grew oppressive and stifling, until Hannah's shoulders fell in surrender. The confession came unwillingly, followed by terrible tranquility. She had wanted to go to the mall. She'd been upset at being told no, She had determined to provide a diversion. Yes, she had ripped her own clothing. Yes, she had purposefully smudged her makeup. Yes, she fabricated the entire narrative about me attacking her. Her voice was tiny and nearly inaudible when she confessed it. Nothing compares to the assured performance from the night before. Dad's face was ashen. He stared at Hannah as if he was seeing her for the first time, then at me, and then back at Mom. The awful realization of what he had done had finally set in. He had thrashed and expelled his innocent daughter based on a deliberate falsehood. He almost murdered me because he was too ready to trust a theatrical play. His hands started shaking uncontrollably. Mom's reaction was meticulous, precise, and completely crushing. That morning, she had already made phone calls from the Collins residence. Things had already been put in motion and could not be halted. Dad would be moving out immediately, she informed him. Not eventually, not after they discussed it, now. She had just called a divorce attorney. Papers are being prepared to be filed Monday morning. The home would be sold. She had previously met with a real estate agent and arranged for an evaluation. Everything but custody would be divided equally. She would have complete custody of me and no visitation with him until I decided I wanted contact. Not if I decided, she said. But when I decided on my terms, on my timeline. Until then he had no parental rights in my opinion. Dad tried to argue, explaining that it was a mistake and that he deserved another chance to put things right. Mom's expression stayed unchanging, like a granite wall. One mistake, she acknowledged. But a mistake that nearly killed your daughter. A mistake that showed such catastrophically poor judgment that I can no longer trust you with any authority over our family. You had one job as a father. Keep your children safe. You failed spectacularly. Hannah's mom's response was cold and exact. My sister would complete the school year. Then she would move in with our father, wherever he landed up. She'd made her decision when she lied. Mom said she had decided to exploit Dad's trust, sacrificing her sister for something as insignificant as a trip to the mall. These were not the acts of someone who cherished family, so she could accept the consequences. Hannah protested immediately and loudly. She wailed. I made a mistake. She hadn't intended for things to get this far. She hadn't expected Dad to react so angrily. Mom's expression remained unwavering as the justifications flowed forth. Hannah had seen me freeze on the porch and grinned as I hammered on the door. That was not an error. It was harsh, and there would be repercussions. After experiencing abuse, it is vital to create solid legal and emotional boundaries in order to regain agency and ensure safety. Legal boundaries, like as restraining orders and specific custody arrangements, are critical for safeguarding victims, whereas emotional boundaries establish what behaviors are acceptable and unacceptable in future contacts, frequently necessitating the dissolution of poisonous links. Dad packed 2 luggage with Mom's careful supervision. She followed him around the house, making certain he only removed his own possessions, nothing that might be challenged later. He attempted numerous times to apologize to me, his voice cracking, but the words seemed empty and hollow. Sorry, did not stop the hitting. Sorry, did not erase the trek through the storm, the horror of freezing, or the awful betrayal of being tossed out by the person who was meant to protect me. He departed before midday. Mom stood by the door, her stance tight, as she watched him drive away, disappearing around the corner. Then she turned to Hannah, who had been loitering in the corridor, still unsure whether she could talk her way out of trouble. Mom's reaction spoke volumes. No amount of tears would suffice this time. The next several weeks were a flurry of legal processes. Mom handled it all with the same calm efficiency she used in medical situations. Checking off items on a mental checklist, filing divorce papers, obtaining a restraining order, listing the house, and scheduling a therapy session. Everything was documented, photographed, and recorded. She created such a strong case that Dad's lawyer urged him not to challenge anything. School got complicated, word had spread about what had transpired. Maybe Sophie told someone. Perhaps the truth just slips out, as it usually does in tiny villages. Everyone looked at me differently. Teachers were very kind. My classmates either ignored me or tried too hard to be pleasant. Hannah had even worse treatment. People had heard she lied, and that her lying almost killed me. Her friends withdrew themselves, unable to trust someone capable of such treachery. Hannah times, but her attempts were uncomfortable and plainly motivated by desperation rather than real regret. She missed her pals and the life she had previously. Her deceit had ruined everything. Mom watched these attempts with the same clinical detachment, never interfering or softening. There will be consequences, she warned Hannah. Actions have them. Dad leased an apartment across town, somewhere modest and gloomy that represented his much reduced circumstances. The divorce settlement awarded him precisely half of the assets, But half wasn't much after accounting for legal bills and the cost of starting a new family. His new position paid less, partially because news had spread about his unexpected availability. Nobody appeared to want to hire the dad who almost murdered his child. He wrote letters that I didn't read and voicemails that I didn't listen to. Mom preserved everything, methodically documenting his attempts to communicate for legal grounds. The divorce process exposed truths about my parents' marriage that I had never known. Mom had been unhappy for years, but she stayed for practical reasons. Stability for our children, financial stability, and the normal considerations when considering whether to split up a family. Dad's violence had provided her all the rationale she needed, unequivocal proof that remaining was more perilous than leaving. Dad's counsel attempted to portray him as a worried father, who overreacted in a state of stress. The tactic failed when Mom's counsel submitted images, medical records, and meteorological data from that night, demonstrating how dangerous the conditions had been. The judge's grave, uncompromising demeanor as she evaluated the evidence said volumes. No amount of legal trickery could justify putting a youngster into a blizzard. The custody hearing was really unpleasant. Dad's lawyer called me to the stand and attempted to convince me to declare I wanted a connection with my father, that I missed. Tried to apologize numerous. Him. And that I knew he made a mistake. I spoke straight to Dad, studying his expression as I recalled the trip through the storm in graphic, frightening detail. The numbness creeping through my limbs. The great confusion, and the true bone-deep worry that I might die. After 20 minutes, his lawyer stopped asking me. Hannah also testified, despite the fact that her own counsel told her not to. She attempted to justify her deception as an impulsive deed of a teenager, which she quickly regretted. However, the prosecution obtained footage from our doorbell camera. I had no idea this footage existed. It showed Hannah watching me stop on the porch, with a faint, unsettling grin before turning away. The film was devastating, difficult to dismiss as typical adolescent folly. She had taken pleasure in my agony. Mom's testimony was clinical and sad. She proceeded over the timeline, pointing out flaws in Hannah's statement that Dad should have seen had he bothered to ask questions. She offered proof of Hannah's habit of manipulation, including minor falsehoods throughout the years and situations in which my sister had twisted the facts to get her way. This had not been a unique instance. There had been an escalation. The judge granted Mom full custody with wording that made Dad's prospects of obtaining visits nearly difficult. The decision cited his catastrophic failure of judgment, willingness to use violence without evidence, and reckless endangerment of a minor child. You nearly murdered your kid, and this court will not give you another chance to do so. During the divorce proceedings, financial discovery showed that Dad had been concealing money. Not in large quantities but enough to present a clear image of dishonesty. He had a separate bank account and made some investments that he never acknowledged. Mom's lawyer seized on these revelations, painting a picture of a guy who had been duplicitous even before the Hannah incident. The judge altered the settlement appropriately, awarding Mom 65% of the marital assets rather than the standard 50-50 share. Dad's folks attempted to intercede. They contacted Mom, recommended family therapy, and argued that breaking up the family was too drastic. Mom visited with them once, brought images and medical reports, and explained exactly what their son had done to me. They exited that meeting in startled silence, their arguments abandoned in the face of overwhelming facts. They didn't contact us again. We relocated and marched to a smaller home on the opposite side of town, with 3 bedrooms instead of 4 and a basic kitchen. But it was ours. Mine and Mom's place, free of treachery or violence. Mom let me choose paint colors for my room, helped me organize furnishings, and ensured I had all I needed. She was kinder with me than she had been previously, more cautious, as if I were something valuable that had almost been lost. Hannah moved in with Dad in June, just after school concluded. The situation was just as Mom had promised. Finished the school year in familiar surroundings. Then moved to Dad's little flat. My sister's complaints had diminished by then, replaced by a morose resignation. She understood Mom meant every word, and no amount of tears or trickery could modify the phrase. The apartment complex where Dad and Hannah wound up was in a rougher section of town, with police sirens blaring every night and a parking lot full of cars with expired registrations. Dad's lower income resulted in less favorable circumstances. Hannah disliked it. She grew up in a comfortable home in a decent area, with friends who had pools and finished basements. Now she shared a 2-bedroom apartment with thin walls and neighbors who argued so loudly that every word could be heard. Her new school was also harsher, full of children who didn't care about her prior social standing. She was no one there, just another new chick with an attitude issue. I learned about their problems through the grapevine. Mutual friends, individuals who know both families. Dad was drinking more, arriving at work late and barely holding his life together. Hannah was failing classes, getting into fights, and plummeting in ways that indicated she'd finally recognized how much she'd damaged. Hearing about their deterioration made me feel a sense of dismal satisfaction. A greater chunk simply felt empty. School had changed for me too, albeit in different ways. Teachers who knew me previously regarded me with caution, as if I may shatter if they pushed too hard. Guidance counselors continued arranging check-ins, asking how I was adapting and if I needed someone to talk to. The attention was oppressive, even though I knew it was motivated by concern. My grades improved when everything went apart. With the pandemonium at home gone, I could concentrate on my studies without waiting for the next explosion. Mom hired a place that was peaceful and neat, allowing me to focus. Math made sense in ways it didn't before. When I wasn't on edge, I could write English essays with ease. Sophie remained my best buddy throughout everything. Her parents testified at the custody court. Their story of my arrival that night had substantial weight with the court. Mr. Collins stated my problem in harsh medical terms. Early stages of hypothermia, frostbite on exposed limbs, and obvious evidence of shock or trauma. His evidence made Dad's lawyer obviously uneasy. The Collins family never treated me differently, nor did they make me feel like a charity case or a victim. Sophie's house became a second home, a place where regular life could continue. Movie evenings, school sessions, and meals where the most dramatic moment was when someone forgot to set the table. Normalcy provided healing in ways that treatment did not. Mom returned to work with fresh zeal, working extra shifts, volunteering, and enrolling in training programs she had previously turned down. I realized she was processing everything via action, burning off her fury and terror by remaining continually active. On her days off, Mom was completely there, making lavish dinners, assisting with homework, and taking me shopping for necessities. The contrast was dramatic yet sustained. Her friends gathered behind us over those months. Women from the hospital, neighbors from our previous block, folks I had known my entire life. They donated casseroles, supplied babysitting, and overall formed a support network to replace some of the void left by losing half of our family. Mom gently accepted their compassion, which might be overpowering at times. Dad attempted to build a relationship through letters, lengthy meandering pages about regret and development, pledges to improve, and explanations for why he had responded so badly. Mom reviewed each one first, looking for anything wrong before deciding whether to give them to me. The majority went right into a file folder she retained for legal purposes. The few she offered me were hollow, like meaningless words on paper, unable to restore what had been done. I tried reading one once and got 3 paragraphs in before my fury flared up so much that I had to put it down. He wrote about understanding my point of view, about the treatment he'd started, and about trying to regain my trust. Everything sounded like scripts from a self-help book. Empty statements that proved he knew intellectually what he'd done wrong but didn't feel the crushing weight. I had sleeplessness throughout my first year. I'd lay up until 2 or 3 a.m., my mind racing with innumerable what-if possibilities. What if I didn't make it to Sophie's house? What if the Collins family hadn't been there? The what-ifs were unending and tiresome. Mom ultimately sent me to a sleep doctor, who provided medicine that helped, but the dreams continued to occur sometimes. High school started rather tough. Freshman year brought a building full of classmates who had heard variants of my narrative. The majority of them have become corrupted as a result of repeated recounting. Some youngsters regarded me like a morbid celebrity, asking for information about the snow and the beating. Others avoided me completely, uneasy with the living reminder that parents can be deadly. I learned to balance both extremes by keeping my head down and focused on my studies. Sophie and I ended up in various buddy groups that year, which is a natural progression as people acquire distinct interests. She remained polite and continued to invite me to events, but we were not as close as we had been previously. The common suffering had briefly linked us, but true friendship required more than that. We stayed friendly until graduation, then lost touch as college drove us in various directions. Mom began dating when I was 15, taking great care to ensure that I was at ease with anyone she introduced me to. Neither of the partnerships lasted long. She'd learned to see red flags and walk away at the first sight of dishonesty or fury. Her standards had risen to unrealistically high levels, which felt fair given what we had been through. One person, James, survived over 7 months. He was gentle with my suspicions, never pushed too far, and always respected Mom's limits. They'd go out to dinner or the movies while I stayed at home, and he'd leave her with nothing but a kiss goodnight on the porch. I admired his discipline, even if I despised his presence. Mom eventually stopped it, recognizing that I was not ready to share her with anybody. Dad's attempts to re-enter my life intensified around my 17th birthday. Letters became phone calls to Mom's number, which he was not supposed to answer. Gifts came on our porch. Books, jewelry and other items that showed he had taken an interest in my hobbies. Mom cataloged everything, preserved the receipts and cards, and created a dossier to chronicle his boundary infractions. When he arrived to her residence one evening, she contacted the police. Mom came up with the idea for the restraining order, which she carried out with the same systematic efficiency that she had used in the divorce. Dad had been clearly ordered to keep away, yet he had repeatedly disregarded that directive, demonstrating an inability to respect our limits. The court instantly issued the injunction, expanding it to include both Mom and myself. Dad was apprehended by police the next day when he attempted to approach me outside school. Hannah graduated from high school with the closest margin. I heard she barely finished her senior year, and had skipped so many classes that the school threatened to keep her back. In the photographs I saw on social media, she appeared older than her years, and more weathered. The girl who had grinned while watching me freeze had transformed into someone I could hardly recognize. She walked out of Dad's apartment the day after graduation, crashed with friends, did minimum wage jobs, and wandered through the following several years without a plan. Social media revealed a string of disastrous relationships and questionable actions, indicating the usual trajectory of someone who never learnt to accept responsibility for consequences. I looked from afar, feeling nothing. Dad had a second episode which confirmed Mom's decision to entirely cut him off. He got into a confrontation at a pub, beat someone so hard that their jaw broke, and was jailed for assault. The specifics were unclear, but witnesses claimed he had been drinking, and became hostile when someone ran into him. When alcohol was present, the pattern of aggression that began with me appeared to spread to strangers. His lawyer was able to keep him out of jail, but he was unable to avoid probation, required anger management sessions, and limits on his ability to spend time with his own children. Not that it mattered, I had previously forbidden any communication, and Hannah had gone on to cause her own calamities. Dad had successfully alienated everyone who had ever cared for him. Over the next few months, I saw them on occasion, usually in stores or on the street. Dad always seemed shrunken, smaller than I recalled. Hannah was upset, her visage a permanent frown implying that life with Dad was not matching her expectations. I felt nothing when staring at them. There is no wrath or pleasure, only a tremendous void where family once was. Therapy helped. Dr. Morrison specialized in trauma and understood how to help me comprehend what had happened without pushing too hard. She stated that betrayal by family members left distinct types of wounds, that recovery was not linear, and that some days were more difficult than others. She was correct. Some mornings, I awoke enraged, ready to shout about the injustice of it all. Other days, I simply felt exhausted, weighed down by the weight of everything that had happened. Mom never questioned her decisions. She had burnt down our family, spread the ashes, and rebuilt something new from the rubble. Just the two of us, finding out how to be a family with half of the members missing. She worked her shifts at the hospital, came home to prepare dinner, helped with schoolwork, and did all of the typical mom things, but with a newfound passionate protectiveness. High school came and went. I obtained high grades, went to college, and constructed a life apart from the family I'd lost. Hannah reached out a few times over the years, sending emails implying a desire to reconcile and restore what she had lost. I never replied. Some things are permanently broken. Dr. Morrison said that was okay. I didn't owe anyone forgiveness simply because we shared DNA. Dad died when I was 26. Heart attack, abrupt and deadly. I attended the funeral because Mom claimed it would provide closure, even though I wasn't sure I needed it. Hannah was there, older but with the same calculating attitude she had at 17. She tried to talk to me about using Dad's death as a bridge to reconnect. I walked away in the middle of a sentence,